Hello, dear listeners, and welcome to a new season of Woman Inherits the Earth. Thanks to some international travel and a generally busy summer, we ended up taking a much longer hiatus than expected from the podcast this year. So when we finally got back to it, we both agreed it was time to adjust our approach. The main change we decided to make is to divide our podcast into seasons with a set number of episodes. We have our next 8 episodes planned, with release dates that will take us into December. After that, we'll go on a holiday break, and we will return in late winter or early spring with a new season, starting off with a few Oscar-nominated movies like we've done for the past 2 years. We're hoping that this new schedule will help us to keep our uploads a little more consistent, while also avoiding the ever-present threat of burnout. We are both very excited for the season we've got planned for you all, which includes some of my personal all-time favorite films. We hope you enjoy listening to it as much as we did making it. Without further ado, I'll let you get into this week's episode, wherein we discuss the 2016 film Arrival. Hello and welcome to Woman Inherits the Earth, a mother-daughter podcast about the representation of women in movies and television. I am Tess Adair, a writer and the author of the paranormal mystery series The Corrals and Chronicles, and Beth's daughter.
And I am Beth Von Baron, Tess's mother and also a writer. In the podcast today, we are discussing the 2016 film Arrival. Arrival is an hour and 56 minutes long. It was directed by Denis Villeneuve, who is Canadian, and it is a Canadian film. It was written by Eric Heiserer. The screenplay was by Eric Heiserer, based on a short story, The Story of Your Life, by Ted Chiang. It's a Paramount Pictures and Film Nation film, and it stars Amy Adams, Jeremy Renner, and Forrest Whitaker, all very familiar names to most of us. Do you want to do a short summary?
Yeah, I'll also just mention it also stars, according to IMDb, you pronounce it Tai Ma. It's spelled T-Z-I space M-A. I'm mentioning it because he was also in a movie that we've covered previously for the pod, The Farewell. He played the main character's dad.
And this film, he's the general, the Chinese general, and he is an amazing actor. Every time I see him, I think, this man needs to act more. But I think he's done a lot of character roles, so we see him a lot. And he has a very small role in this film, but it is a pivotal role. Yeah.
All right, on to the summary. And I'm just reading the IMDb summary here because I decided that if I tried to write it myself, it would get too complicated too quickly.
And this is one of those films that doesn't really need a big summary anyway. So go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Linguist Louise Banks leads a team of investigators when gigantic spaceships touch down around the world. As nations teeter on the verge of global war, Banks and her crew must find a way to communicate with the extraterrestrial visitors. So basically, this is a first contact story. It's a genre of sci-fi where we have our initial contact with aliens. Most famously in the movie Contact.
Yes. And I would give it a little bit more than that. I would add that she's a linguist, which makes a lot of sense to me, because I think anytime I think about first contact with an alien species, the first thing that comes to me is language. Yeah. And they kind of science fiction films have a tendency to gloss over that. Yeah. Famously, the TV science fiction has glossed over it. Star Trek, most notably. They always have some explanation for why everybody understands each other, but it doesn't make any sense in the long run. So she's a linguist, which makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense to me is Jeremy Renner's character, Ian, who is a scientist, and he's a Neil deGrasse Tyson scientist. What is that? Physicist,
astrophysicist?
I think, right? Something like that. And that makes no sense to me at first. He does have, at some point, a little bit of what he does for a career actually does kind of help the story a little bit at one point. But so those two lead two different teams of people investigating.
Well, my understanding is that people who study linguistics as opposed to just, languages do actually see language as very similar to math. So like there's overlap there. And I think so they talk a little bit at some point about how each of the different countries is trying to communicate with the aliens, because eventually it is revealed that the Chinese government is using the game Mahjong to try to communicate with them. So I think maybe what they're saying is that math is one potential way to try to communicate with them.
Yeah, and it's not like they agreed on this. They all took their own different approaches, and we only know of three. One is that, and then there's the guy that they communicate with on a TV monitor. I don't know what country he's from, but he talks about they were examining the communication from a mathematical and scientific standpoint. I think it's mostly a mathematical. It starts with an F.
The Fibonacci sequence?
Yeah, that's it. So he's doing that. I don't know what country he is. He might be just another American.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Communicating with other. And another character in the film we didn't mention, and I don't remember his name, is the CIA officer who is kind of the evil foil in the movie. He is the sticking point for the other three people trying to work together. And we'll get to
Agent
that in a minute.
Halpern.
But yeah, that's his name, Halpern. And he actually has pretty high billing on the film because he is, again, a pivotal figure, but he's not he's not a person who has a personality. He kind of represents the authoritarian secret agency element in the film. And he is a CIA officer.
Yeah, he's kind of an antagonist. He's not a villain, but he's an antagonist.
That's the word I was looking for. He's an antagonist, yeah. So just a little bit about the actors here. Forrest Whitaker was one of his first big roles was in Platoon. He was also in Good Morning Vietnam. So he has 2 Vietnam movies under his belt, and those were early in his career. He is 62 now. He was 53 when they made this, or when it was released. His first major role, however, one for which he was nominated for an Academy Award, was as Charlie Parker in the film Bird. He did win an Academy Award for Best Actor for Last King of Scotland, where he played Idi Amin. And every time I've never watched either one of these movies. I haven't seen Bird. I should have. I've always wanted to. I haven't seen Last King of Scotland. And every time I read about it and see that it's a movie about Idi Amin, who was this horrific dictator, I used to know more about him. It's kind of gone out of my memory. This is interesting to me, and I can't believe I've never seen it, but I haven't. But anyway, he did win an Academy Award for that. Amy Adams. She is now 50. She was 41 when she made the film. And as Tess well knows, I have never liked Amy Adams. And I think it's because she's made a lot of movies that I just had no interest in seeing. Mm-hmm. She tends to play, characters who are kind of naive and overly happy and just really have never liked her as an actor. She has, interestingly, been nominated for 6 Academy Awards. The film that I mostly know her for, there's 2 of them actually, but one of them is American Hustle. I did see her in that. It's not a film I loved terribly. I thought it was pretty awful.
Yeah, I thought that movie sucked.
Yeah.
I thought that movie, the only reason for me to see that movie is that Jennifer Lawrence puts on a great performance. But it's a pretty small role in the movie, and the movie is otherwise just kind of extremely meh.
Jennifer Lawrence is the reason to see the film.
Yeah.
Anyway, so she made a lot of movies I haven't seen, but from what I understand, before this film, Doubt was probably her best film.
I think that was
not in terms of her role, but in terms of the best film.
I know that wasn't the first thing I ever saw her in, because she had a bit part in an episode of Buffy. But
really?
That was, yes, she plays Tara's cousin in the episode where Tara's horrible misogynistic family comes to try to take her back. So that was technically the first thing I ever saw her in. But the first thing that I saw her in and knew who she was Doubt. And I thought she did a pretty good job in that movie. And actually, I think we should probably cover that for the podcast at some point. It's been a long time since I've seen it, but my memory is that it talks about a lot of important topics that we often discuss here.
Yeah, and it's Meryl Streep and somebody else.
Philip Seymour Hoffman.
That's it.
It's also got Viola Davis in it.
It's Meryl Streep, Viola Davis, Philip Seymour Hoffman, and Amy has a small role. But here's my thing about Amy Adams. I have never liked her. She completely changed my attitude about her in this film. I think she is the reason to see this film.
Yeah.
Other than its themes and beautiful filmmaking. It's just a gorgeous film. And the sound and everything. She is just amazing. I don't even have a word for it, but I was only 10 minutes into it when I was already completely changing my attitude about her.
And I think I've been telling you that for a while, because you've disliked Amy Adams for a while, and every time you say that, I'm like, you got to watch Arrival.
You've said it many times.
See it.
And I will also say that, as is true of so many good science fiction films, I am hesitant to even call this a science fiction film, because when it's a film that is this good, with its filming and its acting and its storytelling and its themes, it's just a good film. It's a good action film, I guess, in that sense. And it does fall under science fiction, but I don't think you can call it a science fiction film. I can't explain that. I think because the best science fiction really isn't science fiction, and this is in that category.
I'm not exactly sure what you mean by that, except that you mean that,
okay,
that you think the term science fiction is degrading.
No, I don't. I think some people do.
Okay.
And that's a really good point. That's actually a really good question that we could address. I do think some people don't take science fiction seriously. Mm-hmm. And so if I had to, I would remove that concept from this film. I don't think we should have to, but I think because people don't take it seriously. But this is just an artistic film that happens to be set in the science fiction genre. How about that?
I do think this film qualifies as science fiction, but I will say I think a lot of science fiction tends to have a more action-oriented aesthetic.
That might be it, yeah.
And this one definitely does not. When you're watching Arrival, it does feel a little bit more like it's trying to be an art film or an independent film. Mm-hmm. Like it's not filmed in a way to exactly heighten the sense of tension. It's sort of more about the moments of stillness and contemplation. It's a very contemplative film, and I think it's also I kept thinking it's kind of like an action movie for intellectual nerds.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. And it's a lot like Children of Men in the sense that it's a dramatic story with real people's experiences and with a literary feel to it that happens to have a science fiction aspect to it.
But see, I would say that just, to me, underlines how little people understand science fiction, because science fiction can be all of these things. It's just that a lot of people think of science fiction as this kind of pulpy action thing, and it doesn't have to be.
And it's immature. It's an immature art form, and it's really not. I read just a brief part of an article that Vox wrote about this film when it came out 9 years ago, and what they said was, and I wrote this down because I think it's a great quote: the best science fiction isn't even science fiction. And I can't explain why I think that's so good, except that, like you said, most science fiction is hyper dramatic or
action oriented, often violent.
Yeah. And it's unrealistic. And when I think of the scene in this film where Amy Adams is walking into the interaction with the two alien beings, and she's hesitant and she's breathing heavy, she's being very brave about it, and she goes forward and she does what she has to do. But as I'm watching her, I'm thinking, this is realistic. She is willing to do this, but she is clearly, I'm not even sure frightened is the right word, but she's certainly concerned for her safety.
Yeah.
Because it's alien in every possible meaning of the word. It's not just that we attach the word alien to beings from other worlds, but the experience is alien. The environment where they find themselves, where they're walking in a gravity-distorted environment, and they don't know what's going to happen. The future is unknown. That's exactly what's going on here. The future is what they're looking at. I mean, and it always is. We were always looking towards the future, but in this instance, it is a potentially life-ending future if they're not careful. They could die. So that when she's walking in that moment that it takes her to walk forward, it was very relatable.
Yeah.
I related to it. I would do it too. I am claustrophobic. They ask her at one point if she's claustrophobic and if she's gone scuba diving. And what they don't ask her is, are you familiar with zero gravity? Do you understand about that? That's the question they should have asked, but that's beside the point right now. But when she's doing this, it's so relatable. I just really...
I mean, I think what happens in the spaceship isn't exactly zero gravity. It is different gravity.
It's distorted. Distorted, yeah.
And the whole experience of meeting the aliens, it changes all of them, and it changes her most of all. I guess we didn't really mention our spoiler note at the beginning, but I'll mention it now. Arrival is a movie that I think you should watch for the first time without any spoilers, and there is no way for us to talk about it without spoiling it. So if you haven't seen Arrival, you should see it now.
Well, and it's 9 years old, and a lot of people have seen it, so...
Yeah, but I'm just saying, like, if you haven't, you should watch it without knowing anything about it the first time through. So, spoilers now. One of the things that we eventually learn throughout the movie, and they kind of give it to us piecemeal, is that this experience with the aliens literally changes how her brain works. And that's kind of one of the biggest things that the movie is about. She's a linguist, and one of the first concepts that they talk about is the idea that the language you speak changes how you think or determines how you think, and that learning new languages can change how you think accordingly.
And it affects your experience.
Yes.
Language determines and affects experience. People with different languages may experience the same thing completely differently because of it changes how you think. Yeah.
Well, and you were saying, we were talking about the term science fiction. A related term that I sometimes do think is more appropriate is speculative fiction. And I think here that might be the better term.
That is very good for this, yeah.
Yeah, because it's basically, I mean, speculative fiction essentially functions as like a more generic term. So speculative fiction often includes science fiction and fantasy, but essentially what it means is you're speculating about a possibility. And this film is basically taking that idea, which is a real idea, that language affects the way you think, determines the way you think, and they're kind of expanding that. And they're expanding that through Louise's experience. She learns the alien language, and she learns that the aliens do not experience time in a linear fashion. And through learning their language, she no longer experiences time linearly. She can look at the future, basically. But it's not even just looking at the future. It's like her life is no longer a linear experience for her. And that's a speculative fiction concept. You're taking this real idea and saying, well, what if? What if this true thing could also mean this other thing that's much more fantastical? You know, what if we could no longer experience our lives linearly entirely because of how learning a language changed our brain? And she ultimately ends up publishing a book to help people learn the language,
which actually speaks to the structure of the film.
Yeah.
So, and we might as well get into this since you've already divulged the ending. And it's important, I think, that you did that, because you're literally 40 minutes into this film before you realize that something different is going on here. I wrote it down. Yes. 41 minutes. So we start the film with a scene of her and her child. And there are, it's like 4 or 5 scenes with her over the years, from when she's a baby until when she's a 12-year-old and has this fatal illness that kills her eventually. Now, she sees all this, and she's talking narration over it, Amy Adams is, and what she's talking about at that point is memory and remembering her child's life. And what we don't know yet is that she has not experienced this yet. This is kind of a flashback. I mean,
it's a flash forward.
Can't interpret it at this point. It's a flash forward, but it really is, realistically, it's a flashback.
Well, we think it's a flashback. We think that she's already experienced this, and that the Louise that we meet has essentially already lost her daughter until the 40-minute mark.
That's what I meant. I didn't mean a flashback. It's a flashback that happens at the end of the film.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's hard to explain.
It's a flash forward, but it's presented as a flashback, and that's what we think it is until the reveal at 40 minutes.
And they support that in many ways. So we continue to think it's a flashback because she's leaving the building at one point. She's walking very slowly. She's clearly devastated. And then when she gets home, after she tries to hold her class. She's a university teacher. And then all the cell phones and the TV news are going off the wall about these 12 I want to call them obelisks, because that's what it looks like to me, and I don't understand. Actually, they look like whales. So we've got lots of science fiction references here, the obelisks, and 2001 and the whales and the Star Trek movie. But so we've got all that they definitely do their homework here in this film. But when she realizes that something has happened, she goes home. And as she's walking in the house, first of all, it's a house that when I watched it the second time, I realized it's the same house that she shares. Later on in the film, we realize, well, she ends up marrying Jeremy Renner. Let's just say she ends up marrying this guy. Yeah. But again, these stories are told in flash forwards, like you said. And it's the same house. So she walks into this house and she's talking to her mother, who asks her if she's okay.
Yeah.
So that kind of reinforces that she has lost a child. There's something that's happened to her.
She seems lonely. She seems like she's living this really lonely, isolated life, which desolate. Because of Kuleshov's effect, which I haven't yet gotten to talk about on the podcast, we assume, she's lonely and sad because she lost her daughter. But technically, we don't know that for sure. We're assuming it because of the order in which things were presented to us.
Exactly.
Sometimes films lie to you. So just to explain, Kuleshov's effect is it's essentially what I just said. It's when the order of images presented to you affects how you interpret them. So for instance, you're shown an image of an old man's face. And if you're shown the image of his face after seeing like a happy child on a bicycle, then you're more likely to interpret that image as, he's just being contemplative and contemplating youth in a happy way. But if you're shown that man's face after an image of like a rainy day or like gray clouds or whatever, then you assume that the man is miserable.
Now, how do you spell that? What effect?
Kuleshov's effect? Kuleshov, the Kuleshov effect.
Okay. So, and that is has such a dramatic and effect on me in my watching of this film, that today I went back and watched the first 40 to 50 minutes of the film because I did not trust my memory. Yeah. I was absolutely certain that she had more of these flashbacks of her child after she got to the place in Montana where the alien ship is. And I was wrong.
Yeah.
But that is what I expected. And so very interesting the way they structured the film. Yeah. I really love this.
I mean, interestingly, I had the exact same expectation. So I saw this movie when it came out in theaters in 2016, and I hadn't watched it since. And then I watched it yesterday, and I expected the exact same thing. I thought that the flashbacks were throughout, and then I was like, we are like half an hour in, and there hasn't been another flashback.
Right,
so yeah.
Right. But you knew to look for it because you knew what was going to happen, and I didn't know to look for it. So that's why I went back today, and I thought, well, okay. So they really did a good job with this, because I was absolutely convinced that what I thought had happened at the end of the film couldn't have happened, or that they got something wrong. But it was not the case. Anyway,
yeah, and I both knew to look for it and was intentionally looking for it, because I think basically when you see the first flashback after the initial thing, that's when she has learned enough of the language for it to start to change her brain.
And it's not very much. Much. But that was what I was trying to get at. If she had these flashbacks before, but she didn't. Her very first flashback is after she has gotten them to name themselves.
Yes.
And that is their first real communication. Of course, they decide to name them Abbott and Costello, which I think is absolutely wonderful.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, the language that they're learning, as they say, has no verbal component.
No.
It's a written language,
which is why
that does
not
matter.
Yeah.
They can't call them anything else. Like, They don't have, as far as, they have no way to communicate their verbal names, basically. So.
But the thing that's important about that, this point in their communication training, is that it's like when you're raising a child and they're acquiring language, they have to at some point come to understand that they are both Beth and human and woman or girl and right-handed. There are many ways we describe ourselves, and human is one of them.
Yeah.
So for them to communicate it successfully to these two heptapods is what they're calling him, and we can explain that in a second. But for them to get that across to them, that they are both human and Ian and Louise, that's a significant communication success.
Yeah.
And that's what everything hinges on. That's a pivotal moment in the film. Everything hinges on that, and that's when her what they're calling hallucinations. She doesn't call it that. But when I've read reviews of the film, they call them hallucinations. But what they really are flash forwards.
Yeah.
So they call them the heptapods because how many legs do they have?
Heptapods.
They look like an octopus. I keep getting it wrong. Heptapod. Yeah. I have it written right.
Heptapods.
So hepta means how many numbers? Is it
7?
7? So an octopus has 8. And that's what they look like to me. They look like an octopus.
But I did notice it's not just that they have 7 legs, but they also have 7 fingers. So every once in a while they put one of their legs up against the screen that's separating them from the humans. It's kind of like a hand, but it's sort of like a suction cup with, like, for lack of a better term, fingers around it, and they have 7 of those as well.
And it explodes ink into the air, into the atmosphere. And interestingly, as you were talking, I remembered something else. Sometimes I get a little anxious when I'm watching science fiction because I'm worried about people getting killed and I'm worried about scary scenes. But as soon as I saw that glass wall, I kind of instantly understood that these heptapods, am I saying it right?
Yes.
These heptapods were trying to protect the humans. And throughout the entire film, they are trying to protect them because they are more advanced and they understand that they could be a danger to us. And that's not why they came to our world. They came to help us. They never really explain, or I'm not sure we ever really understand what they see in our future that makes them think they need to give us that ability, which is not to see the exact future, but to see the consequences of choices and behaviors and try not to make those choices and behaviors. I think that's what they're getting at. It's to help us avoid a catastrophe in the future.
That's a really good point, and it's also connected to how you feel about these movies, because there's a specific point where a terrorist, or I guess I'm calling them a terrorist because it's a terrorist attack, but like a
I think
small
they're totally terrorists. Just because they're army people doesn't mean they're not terrorists.
That's true.
And it's only 3 or 4 men.
3 or 4 of the army guys.
Of the army guys. And it's never explained. Why don't they explain to us why they were doing this? But go ahead and explain what happened.
Essentially they were listening to an Alex Jones type person. And got radicalized. But yeah, a group of army guys get radicalized and they place an explosive on the ship. And nobody else knows that they've done this. And right after they do this, Louise realizes that she needs to go and talk to the heptapods again to clarify what they've just said. So she and Jeremy Renner's character, Ian, go back up and they don't know that there's an explosive there. And basically the whole time that they're up there, the heptapods are trying to warn them. And this wasn't that clear the first time I watched it, but this time through, I'm like, I know what's going to happen, so I know, like, they're trying to warn them that there's an explosive and that they're in danger and they need to go, because they already know. They already know what's going to happen.
They can see the difference in good people and bad people. They see that instinctively. And they know that these 2 people are good people and that they will be killed. And so they kind of use some kind of force to push them and save their lives.
The point that I'm trying to make is they don't have that fear because of how they experience time. They already know everything that's going to happen. And they just let it happen. And in fact, one of the heptapods is killed by the explosion. There are 2, they call the 2 heptapods Abbott and Costello. I guess we don't for sure know that it's the explosion, but Abbott dies right after that.
Oh, that's right. What was the line?
Abbott is death process. Yeah, so that there's a scene after that where Louise goes up by herself and actually ends up on the other side of the glass in their kind of, it's not exactly liquid, but it's very water-like, whatever gas they're in.
She looks wet, yeah.
Yeah, and she looks wet and she comes out looking wet. In that scene, they communicate directly and we actually get subtitles for what the heptapods are saying, and it doesn't exactly translate with normal English grammar. So when Costello tells her that Abbott is either dead or dying, he says, Abbott is death process. And that's also
It's a beautiful scene because we realize they're kind of communicating telepathically with her. And I think we can assume at that point that that's how they communicate with each other, but they do have a visual language that they're able to translate their communication into a visual language that the humans can grasp. And I'm not completely sure that they see how everything plays out, but they know that enough about the future and the consequences. This is why I think it's not the future exactly, but the potential future consequences of behaviors and choices, that you can alter those behaviors and choices and change those consequences in the future. And that's why they've come here. So they know specifically about the bomb that the stupid Rangers have put in the ship, but that allows them to see the consequence of needing to protect the two good humans, and then they make that happen. They execute it. I mean, they execute that decision.
We kind of never know exactly the extent to which they can see the future, because Amy Adams' character, Louise, as she starts to experience the future, it doesn't come to her in linear order. It comes to her in these flashes,
and it's not complete. It's just images.
It's not complete, yeah. But it also, there's also kind of this vibe that the part of her who is actually experiencing that future stuff doesn't always remember things linearly either, because basically there's like the crux of the film, the action climax, as much as there is one, is when the heptapods basically tell each of the different human factions that they're talking to that they have already given them something, and the word that they seem to be using is weapon. But as Louise points out over and over again, sometimes weapon and tool are not differentiated in languages, and that turns out to be the case. But basically, all of these different nations have been told that they've been given a weapon, and suddenly communication between the nations breaks down, and China starts threatening to bomb the aliens, basically.
Yeah.
And Louise is the one who solves the conflict by traveling into her future mind, for lack of a better term. Like, it's done through filmic language, so we don't entirely understand what's happening, but essentially she experiences her future self at a party where she meets, I think his name, General Shang, played by Tai Ma, and he tells her that she solved the conflict by calling him on his number, and then he gives her his personal number and telling him his wife's dying words. So then in the present/past, she finds a phone and calls him and tells him those words, and that's what causes China to stand down. But all of that, like,
she
when she's
that, it's like what do you call
a loop.
That? It's a loop. So she creates that situation, the consequences of the situation, by visualizing or hallucinating, whatever you want to call it.
And the interesting thing is, the version of her in the future that's talking to him doesn't seem to remember doing this. So it's not exactly like she's seeing the future. It's like her experience of life just isn't linear anymore. But it's not necessarily, it's not a perfect, like, knowledge of her life either. But then again,
but it's effective. It's effective.
Yeah. And also, I think that kind of mirrors how our brains actually work, because as much as we would like to believe that we perfectly remember our past and that we remember it linearly, that's just not true. We remember our past in bits and pieces. Yeah. And they're not, we don't necessarily remember things in the right order, and we definitely don't remember things perfectly. Every time you remember something, you actually degrade that memory a little bit, and the next time you remember it, you're remembering it. So we're constantly editing our own memories.
Well, and there's another scene that does a similar kind of thing. So at this point, we still have not quite understood that what we saw at the beginning of the film was a flash forward. We're beginning to get clues about that, but she is, after she comes out of that experience with when she's in the wet and he tells her that Abbott has died or is dying, she sees her husband leaving her, and she remembers the reason why he leaves her, and it's because she told him about the illness that killed their child, and how it's a rare thing and there's nothing they can do about it.
It's because she told him that she knew before they had the baby that the baby would die.
There you go. I didn't pick that up the first time, and I started rewatching it, but I haven't finished the rewatch, so I didn't pick that up the first time. But there was something there about it, and she's telling, when she gives, Jeremy Renner's character Ian grabs her and tries to get her, they're getting ready to leave. Everybody is evacuating. Yeah. And so he grabs her and he's trying to get her in the truck, and she's saying this, and they have both told each other that they're single, but when she says this to him, he says, "You were married?" And so
when she says what? No, you didn't say what she said.
Oh, when she says, so that's why he left.
I understand why my husband left me.
And this has not happened.
Yeah.
She's seeing it in the future, but we don't know that yet. We still don't really know that yet, because we think she's seen it in the past. Until the scene with the Chinese general, we don't really understand that she's seeing the future.
There's also a moment where she's talking to the heptapods, and I don't remember if it's before or after the husband moment, where she says, I don't understand, who is this child? And that's kind of our clearest indication that she hasn't had the baby yet.
I didn't notice that because there's a lot going on in that scene. So anyway, when she's saying this to Jeremy Renner's character, he says to her, you were married?
Yeah.
So it turns out that they, in the future, they get married, they have this child dies, he leaves her because, she communicates to him at some point in the future that she knew that the child would die and didn't tell him. That's hard because if you're thinking about having a child and you know that child will die, would you choose not to have it? That's a question that I don't think anybody can answer really.
And it's interesting because the film just presents it and doesn't really answer it. I mean, Louise decides to have the child, and she also doesn't give Ian the choice, essentially. I mean, sure, he has a choice. He's the one who asks her if she wants to have a baby. And obviously, anytime you have a baby, you have to know that there is a chance that child will die. But she doesn't tell him what she knows. Although, and this is a slightly facetious point, if he'd read her book, maybe he would know.
I get the impression, though, that that's how he finds out, as he reads it in the book.
Well, no, she says, I was paying particular attention to this scene. We get a scene where she's talking to her daughter, and her daughter expresses the belief that her dad doesn't love her anymore. And Louise says, no, that's not what's happening. He's mad at me because I told him something he wasn't ready to hear. That's how she puts it, which implies that she told him that she knows their child is going to die, but she didn't tell him before they had the child. My guess is that she didn't tell him before they had the child because she figured that he would then not want to have a child with her, and she wanted to have the child.
And again, what she's seeing is not necessarily the future as it will happen. It's the potential future if you don't make if you make certain choices and whatever.
I mean, it's kind of unclear.
And it is unclear. And I was kind of thinking in that moment, I think I would probably go ahead and have the child because you just never know what kinds of scientific things could happen to save the child's life. So I think that's something. I mean, and, we don't know anything else about them. If they had other children, we don't know. So
I think that's a valid interpretation. My interpretation is more that she does know the child will die, but to her, it's worth it to experience that child's life anyway.
And love. And I think she has a line in the movie about that too, and I can't remember what it was. And once she learns how to accept this nonlinear life now, and teach other people how to have that too, because as soon as she starts teaching the language and other people pick up the language, then they are able to do it too. Since it is nonlinear, in a sense, that child is always with her.
Yeah, because it essentially will change your experience of grief and loss, because it's not, we see death as this final thing, and changing your linear perception of reality doesn't necessarily make that not true, but it's more that you would see this person's life, like their lifespan is a thing that exists, and sometimes you experience it and sometimes you don't, if that makes any sense.
No, it does. And she says to her, one of the first things she says to the baby after she's handed the baby to the nurse, and the baby starts crying, she says, oh, come back to me. And then she says, and when she dies, she says, please come back to me. And that's what's happening in her hallucinations or whatever they are, her images of this child in the future and in the past, is that the child is coming back to her.
Also, we should mention, we keep not calling the child by name. Her name is Hannah, which is a palindrome. And they make a point of that. It's the same whether you read it backwards or forwards.
Let's talk about Forest Whitaker's character a little bit. Forest Whitaker is a very emotive actor. He is so deadpan in this movie. And yet when he speaks, there is meaning and thought in what every word. This character does not emit a single word that doesn't have meaning. He uses a lot of shorthand of what he says, but it's very effective. And he is the one representative of the government and the authority and the military oversight. He's the one representative of that world in this film who has a clue about how to make this not a war, how to make this become something that helps them instead of destroys them. And military people are supposed to protect us, but sometimes they don't know how to do that because their approach is always offensive instead of understanding. And he is trying to understand. He's also protective. It pisses him off when she takes her protective equipment off so she can talk to the
heptapods.
Aliens. I'm going to say aliens because so she can talk to them. He's very concerned about her. He is very protective, and that is it seems to be in his nature to protect her.
I mean, I don't think it's just her, because the thing is, like, the reason that they're wearing all that protective gear is not just to protect them, but to keep them from bringing contaminants back to Earth.
And that's true. And yet they seem to understand at this point that they're really not at risk for contamination, but the way the aliens has set up the situation. And yet they're being overly protective every time.
Because they can't see the future.
They can't see the future. And he is trying very hard to understand and to make this linguistic experiment work.
He also asks what turns out to be one of the more important questions, which is, why does Louise start trying to communicate with them through written words instead of spoken words? He says, won't that take longer? And she says, actually, it'll be shorter. And we learn that after that their verbal language, or their written language, does not correspond to verbal sounds.
And doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it make sense that it would take less time? When she has to explain that to him, I kind of thought, why don't you understand that? I mean, I would think that would be true for anybody, even if we were talking to, somebody in sub-Saharan Africa, and we were trying to communicate with them for the first time. Drawing pictures and communicating with symbols it may be easier if the sounds that people are making are so vastly different.
If you're thinking of it from a perspective of how we learn language, we always learn verbal language before we learn written language.
Well, that's
true. So we think of that as an easier thing, even though it might not necessarily be. Part of the reason that we learn verbal language before written language is that babies can't hold a pen.
But you have to have a common, what's the word I want? You have to be talking about the same things.
Frame of reference.
That's it. Point of reference. You have to have a common point of reference for that to work. And that's what she tells them. Well, with Farsi, I knew the language. And I knew what the sounds that they were making. I mean, if you listen to somebody speaking in, there's an African language, I don't know what country it is, but they use a lot of clicks in their language. And if you don't, what country is that? I've seen it several times. But it is really hard for people outside of their community to understand them.
Even on a kind of more simplistic basis, if you grow up in a language where it's not common to roll your R's, some people don't have that ability, because you have to learn it at a certain point of development. And if you get past that development without being able to do it, then you won't be able to do it.
Yeah, which is why we teach these languages, are starting to teach them younger and younger. So I took French in 8th grade, and I was basically able to learn to roll my R's. But if I had learned it in 3rd grade, I would have learned it. I would have been much better at it. And so that's why I think we're making a lot of languages available to children in primary grades now, which is a good idea.
So I guess I want to talk a little bit about why the aliens are here. And we don't ever get a full explanation, but it has to do with their, ability to experience the future. And I guess I'll also talk about the other side of the final climax. So the sentence that Louise gets right before all of the countries stop communicating with each other is, "We have already given you the weapon." And what she eventually figures out is that what they meant was, "We have given you our language." And this kind of harkens back to an early quote from the movie, which I did write down. So when Louise and Ian first meet, he is reading a paper that she wrote. He's reading the intro, and he reads it out loud. He says, "Language is the foundation of civilization. It is the glue that holds a people together. It is the first weapon drawn in a conflict." And as Louise says a couple of times, that weapon and tool are not always differentiated in language because they're not always differentiated in reality. A weapon is a kind of tool. Some tools can be weapons. Every weapon is a kind of tool. And language is also a tool.
And the need for an extra cow is the same as an argument, but it's also different.
I think it's basically a film trick that they're doing there, that the aliens' word for weapon is literally the same word for language. It is meant to harken back to this line, but it makes a kind of sense. They have given them a tool, and as it turns out, what they meant was giving you our language will give you this ability to view time differently, to view it non-linearly the way they do. And I think the further implication of that is once you lose this, the grip that linear time has on you, you will not have as many conflicts with the other countries in your world. The point of the tool is the opposite of a weapon. It's to bring you together. And another thing that they say at one point is many become one. And what they mean literally is they have given each of these different countries a piece of the final thing that they give them, which is when Louise and Ian are in the room with them for the last time for Ian, second to last time for Louise, they throw up a whole bunch of symbols, and they get the image, and they're able to 3D map it, and Ian figures out that it's a puzzle piece, and basically that each of the countries has a piece of the puzzle, so they will need to work together. So literally the many become one is you will need to work together to solve this, to figure out whatever thing it is that we're telling you. But I think the other side to that is many countries become one. The whole point of this enterprise was basically they're coming down to help us heal our endless conflict between nations that has marked the entire history of the world by giving us this ability to view life non-linearly, because once you are no longer controlled by your anxiety about the future, you can take a step back and see that mutual aid is beneficial for all, and that is kind of at the heart of every, moment of trust, is you never know if the person that you put your trust in might in the future betray you, because we can't see the future, but they can. So some of that uncertainty gets alleviated, allowing you to, for lack of a better term, see the bigger picture.
And there's a line. One of them has a line at some point. I think it's Weber, who says something about we don't have one planetary leader. That's not what he says, but that's what he means, because we are so many nations. And I was thinking in that moment, we are a tribal species, and we have got to get past this inclination, this compulsion to not grow past, to continue as tribal humans, or we're never going to get anywhere. And of course, the moment we find ourselves in is a great example of why we need to do that. We're taking a step backwards in some ways with our current government, and it is frustrating for those of us who see the world as a place where humans live, not where Americans live or Canadians or Chinese. That's a real outlook and a real understanding of how the world should be that many people don't have. And this would be a great solution. And of course, it's a film. It's a science fiction film. And the science fiction part of it is the ability to see the future. But it's lovely. It's a lovely concept. And I don't know, I was moved to tears by the end of the film. And it's a very emotional film. And they reinforce that emotionalism with the music. And I just want to say, and we'll talk about the film part of it later, but the music that starts the film and ends it is called On the Nature of Daylight by Max Richter. I've never heard this before, but apparently one of the things I read, it's been used in like half a dozen films, because it's such an evocative piece of music. It makes people feel, and it certainly does. Because to me, it sounds like whale sounds to me, which reinforces my idea that these ships or whatever they're in kind of look like whales to me. So yeah, it's a beautiful film. Truly lovely film. I really like it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you talked me into seeing it. I'm glad you finally talked me into watching it. The other thing about the visuals in the film is that the sets are all pretty simple. I mean, there's a classroom, there's her home, and then you get to the base camp, and it's pretty simple. It's all these white curtains, and they're walking through.
It's kind of stark, too.
It's stark, and it's dark. It's very often dark.
And high contrast.
Yes, high contrast, and you see a lot of times when you see the military people, it's very dark, and then it lights up when you see her. So I think that's a real deliberate thing, because she's bringing clarity to them, and so she gets better lighting on her. The special effects were pretty good, not bad, and the music was just mesmerizing. And so,
yeah, music was great.
My only complaint is there's not a lot of women in this film. She's pretty much it. Even her mother, we only know that she's on the phone.
Well, and her daughter.
And the daughter has like 2 lines. It seems like the majority of the people in her classroom, and I think there are only 6 or 7 who show up for class, most of those were women, but they don't really, one of them has a line.
They're not characters,
so there are no women in this film who have significant dialogue.
Yeah, this is one of my pet peeves, is that a lot of, especially unfortunately, genre films, when the lead is a woman, often every single other character is a man.
I know. I've noticed that too. It's ridiculous. Are there really no other women on these military teams? Because women are in the military now.
Yep.
And they play significant roles in the military, so I don't understand that. Here's a question for you. What was it about her handshaking? Did you get that?
I'm not sure. I did see the handshaking. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily any one interpretation. That kind of brings up just a small point that I wanted to make, which is I think they intentionally cast Amy Adams and Jeremy Renner because they kind of have this sort of normal person thing to both of them. Like Amy
Everyday
Adams...
people.
I mean, they're very smart people. They're both like PhD holders. But other than that, they're not meant to be action heroes, I guess is what I'm trying to say. They're
very thoughtful.
Yeah, like she has worked with the army before, but there's no indication that she was in any way in a war zone. She did some remote translations for the army, and that's it.
Yeah.
And apart from that, she's a professor who somehow afforded an incredibly beautiful house right on the lake, but whatever. But otherwise, she's just a normal person, kind of a lonely person, and same with Ian. They're both just regular people. So I would guess probably the handshake is just anxiety, because she's a normal person dealing with an extraordinary circumstance.
And there's a distinct contrast in their personalities too. And I have to say, I'm just going to say it, that it seems to be a female-male thing.
Oh yeah, for sure.
He is overly confident. He makes assumptions. He is not at all worried about jumping from the platform that takes them up into the ship onto basically a sideways. You have to change the orientation to get into this thing, and it's a gravity thing, and they have to move their body sideways. And she is hesitant. And Forrest Whitaker, takes her by the arm and just says, "Let's go."
And forces her.
And he jumps her up there, and then she adjusts really quickly. But Jeremy Renner's character is overly confident, just jumps at it and then falls. And he does right himself, but he throughout the film is more demonstrative in in the way he talks. He's confident. He connects with the other man. He talks like a man, and she waits to be asked a question. She is I think, she's much smarter than he is in many ways, but she doesn't feel a need to prove that. She knows she's there because they need her, and she waits until she's ready, until they need her to speak, and very male-female kind of contrast.
I think that's true, but I also think there's a switch. I was having the exact same feeling, especially for the early part of the movie. I was like, it's kind of annoying that she's so timid and he's not. But I do feel like there's a switch, which is when she's the one who takes off her protective gear first and moves forward. It's kind of like she's waiting for a reason or something, because I think from that point on,
that's exactly it. She's not doing it to show off or to show that she knows something. She's actually trying to make something happen. Yeah.
And so once she realizes, like, I need them to be able to see me in order to communicate with them, she's the one who takes off her protective gear and then successfully communicates with him. And once that happens, then Jeremy Renner's character also takes off his protective gear and follows her. And I think from that point on, she does start to be a little bit more assertive, because she took a risk and it paid off, because that is the moment that they're finally really able to communicate with the heptapods, when she takes that risk. And it's after that that she starts to stand up to Agent Holpern a little bit more. And then the very end of the film is basically her taking risk after risk after risk, because she knows that if she doesn't, it will mean the end of the world, essentially.
Yeah, absolutely. Did it seem to you a little bit in that moment when Ian decides to take off his clothes or his protective gear and join her, a little bit like Ian in Jurassic Park deciding to throw the
The flame, yeah.
The flare, because he's seeing Alan throw the flare and he thinks, oh, that's a good idea. I'm going to do that too. And then he ends up getting almost killed. So that's what that reminded me a little bit. I wonder if it's coincidence that they're both named Ian. But anyway, so back to the scenery and the setting and everything. There's a lot of smokiness, a lot of cloudiness in this film. I wrote down in my notes somewhere, is Montana that cloudy? I mean, I guess maybe they're up on a mountain. But there's constantly, when they first arrive, there's a big wall of cloud descending on the base camp.
It's a beautiful shot.
And then it is a beautiful shot. But I just wonder, is it that cloudy? And I realize, and of course the heptapods themselves are encased in some kind of smoky, cloudy smokiness. Yeah. So it's a constant thing in the film. And, of course, it probably speaks to confusion and we can't see the future until the cloudiness disappears, that kind of thing. So there's a reason for it, but it's also really well done. It's beautifully filmed.
Yeah, which actually wonder,
is Montana cloudy?
Yeah, I don't know, but that does. I did want to talk about Denis Villeneuve a little bit as a director. I think this is probably the only one of his films that you've seen.
Yeah, I don't think I've seen anything else. Yeah.
I've seen a couple of his now. I've seen this one. I've seen Blade Runner 2049, and I've seen Dune Part 1 and Part 2. These are the films of his that I've seen. It's interesting because, I mean, after I saw this movie, I was kind of interested in him as a director, so I think that is why I decided to see Blade Runner 2049. I think I might want to rewatch that one. The first time around, I didn't like it very much, but I think that was partly because I couldn't hear half of the damn dialogue, and I will say, I think that's kind of a thing with his movies, because I also had that problem in Dune Part 1 and 2.
And it's a problem in this film. I had closed captioning on, and I noticed at some point, if I didn't have this on, I would not be able to hear some of this dialogue.
So I kind of blame Christopher Nolan for this. I feel like he made it in vogue to record dialogue that you can barely hear. And it drives me crazy when people talk about how good Christopher Nolan is at sound mixing, because I'm just like, as far as I'm concerned, he ruined sound mixing in movies. I can no longer fucking understand anything that is ever said. But Denis Villeneuve is also right up there making it is a consistent problem for me in his movies, not understanding what people are saying. So I want to rewatch Blade Runner 2049 at home with the dialogue on or with the subtitles on. So I don't know if that's like a stylistic mark, or if there are just some sound mixers out there who keep getting hired and they're very bad for me and other people with slight issues hearing. But apart from that, I do think he has a pretty distinctive visual style, and I would describe that style as these kind of sweeping vistas with either muted colors or a very specific, limited color palette, and this kind of mumbly talking, and a tendency to... I mean, it's tough in Hollywood because I think, every actor is way more attractive than like your average person. But I do think he has a tendency in these movies to kind of dull down how people look, because the characters in Dune also look kind of not that remarkable. I guess he's going for a kind of realism with how people look, even though, you have to hire beautiful people because that's all who acts in Hollywood, but they all kind of look a little bit more like a normal person. Like we're intentionally doing makeup that isn't meant to be that glamorous. And I will say that I feel like each of these movies, I think he's trying to go for a feminist storyline, and I don't know that I think he's necessarily always succeeding. Or at least as much as one otherwise might. Like, I wouldn't say that Arrival is anti-feminist, certainly not. I think in some ways it's a feminist movie, but, how feminist can it be if there's basically only one female character, even if she is the main character?
I don't think it's a feminist film at all, and I don't think, but it doesn't bother me. It bothers me that there are no other women in the film. I think that that was a real dumb move on his part. Yeah. But it's my only criticism of the film. I mean, pretty much. I don't really have many other criticisms at all. But there should have been more women in it. But I don't see it as a feminist film. But it is a film. It's very feminine in many ways. I mean, she is very feminine, and she's a mother, and that mother thing is an important part of the film. So it's female, it's feminine, it's just not, and she is the hero. She is without a doubt the hero of the film, and she saves the world, as you said. So
she saves the world and she changes the world. You know, her brain is the first one that is able to experience time non-linearly, but she is also the one who publishes the book on how to learn the heptapod language.
She figures out what the change is and why it happens, and then she was able to communicate that in her book to teach other people, so that hopefully as a species we can evolve. And get to a point where the conflict is at least minimized.
But I will say, watching Arrival this time around, having now seen Dune Parts 1 and 2, the visuals are very similar. Dune Part 1 and Dune Part 2, there's a lot of either completely monochromatic or nearly monochromatic scenes. I mean, the way that he does the villains, the Harkonnens in Dune, is they're basically black and white. And I'm not sure if he's literally just like dressing them in all black and white and using makeup, or if he's like graded the film to be black and white, but it looks black and white. But even the scenes that aren't that take place, you know, essentially on a sand planet, those are also very monochromatic. And sure, like, there's only so many ways you can do a sand planet, but, you know, we're also talking about Arrival. Arrival also has this very, like, limited color palette, kind of combined with these big, like, sweeping shots of, like, giant, impressive landscapes.
And in fact, their outfits that they wear, which are orange, are the brightest thing in the film. And that's a nice contrast. But it's also a simple contrast. You're right. Yeah. It's very monochromatic. Well, I'll make a couple of comments here on the science fiction aspects of this. It seems to be, I don't know if you'd call it a trope, but in a lot of science fiction movies, there are assumptions made, especially when we're dealing with aliens, that somehow human technology is going to be on a par with alien technology. And in this film, when they arrive at the base camp, the doctor sees them, and before they do anything else, they take some blood to I'm not sure why, but they load them up with a ton of vaccines. And he actually says to her, you know, that it could make you feel woozy, it could make you, you know, a little nauseated. And really, this is a half an hour before you're sending them into an alien environment, and you're going to load them up with vaccines. What will it protect? He said protect them against a host of bacterial components or something, he said.
Yeah.
Different kinds of bacteria. So, okay, but why would you assume that your vaccine against bacteria, even a variety of bacteria, would work against an alien species you know nothing about? So that's the first thing, but also that he does it right before they're going to basically come into contact with them.
Yeah.
It's just bizarre.
I mean, I don't think it would, but I also don't think that we would send people up there without even trying to protect them from that. You know, it's kind of a like, sure, all I have is this wooden sword, but I'm going to carry my wooden sword anyway, you know?
But to give them vaccines right before they're going into this environment,
yeah, there should have been
like counterproductive, you know?
Yeah, there should have been a longer incubation period, because usually you need to wait a couple of days. Yeah.
And you know, the common assumption in all of these science fiction movies is that somehow our nuclear arsenal is going to protect us against aliens who have transported themselves across the universe. I always laugh at this. Why do you think your nukes are going to do any good? Now, of course, in Independence Day, it does, but that's because they get the nukes into the ship.
Okay, but Independence Day is like kind of even dumber, because that one assumes that a floppy disk is going to be enough. We're going to be able to put a floppy disk, and people today don't even know what a floppy disk is. They think it's a visual representation of the save button. Like, we don't use floppy disks anymore, and it's only 30 years later. But yeah, they use a literal floppy disk to deliver a computer virus to the aliens' ship.
So those are two assumptions, that the vaccine is going to work, and that, you know, our nuclear arsenal is somehow going to protect us. But also, almost every single movie like this assumes that human beings, are going to react with violence and vandalism, that society is going to fall apart because of this threat. Why do we assume that in science fiction movies? I guess because it makes for drama. But it always pisses me off, because why would you assume the worst in human beings who are reacting with a foreign species for the first time, or I mean an alien species for the first time? Why is that assumption there?
I think it's because of the history of colonialism on this planet. A lot of these movies are metaphorical reenactments of first contacts between human cultures. And in a lot of those instances, it did result eventually in violence, generally from European colonizers coming to other parts of the world and violently taking land and resources and lives.
And he says it. Weber says that in the film when it is one of his first scenes with her. He says that she tells him the kangaroo story, which turned out to not be true, but it's a great story. And he says that don't forget that those indigenous people were completely overrun and destroyed by the invaders.
Yeah, which is kind of a misrepresentation of what actually happened. There are still, we're talking about Australia, there are still Aboriginal people, and they weren't actually, like, quote unquote, wiped out in a single conflict. They were oppressed and terrorized over hundreds of years. You know,
and still are.
And still are. The project of colonialism continues for generations. I would say, like, there are basically 3 well-known science fiction stories I can think of where first contact goes well, and this is one of them. And the other 2 are, hilariously, the movies Contact and the Star Trek movie First Contact.
Right.
So the movie Contact is a Jodie Foster movie. We did talk about doing it for the pod, but to be honest, I think it hasn't aged that well. Yeah, it's not as good a movie. It's very similar to this movie. It's also about a female scientist in a room full of men who is the main voice for peaceful communication with the aliens. And she's also dealing with grief. In this instance, the death of her father. But it definitely, Contact is kind of a much sillier movie because it ends with her going through this, like, sort of psychedelic experience where she meets the aliens, but they come to her in the form of her dead father and they walk on the beach. It's very funny.
It's like Stanley Kubrick walked into the film and directed those scenes and then walked off.
Yeah. The other one is First Contact, the Star Trek movie, which the core concept of that movie is the Borg get to Earth and then go back in time to prevent first contact between Earth and the Vulcans. So then the Starship Enterprise, as headed by Captain Picard, has to go back in time to prevent the Borg from preventing first contact. But essentially, it retells us the story of first contact between Earth and the Vulcans, and it is a period of time in this fictional universe where Earth has been shattered by a series of wars and catastrophes, and much of the population has been wiped out, and what still remains are mostly people living in these, like, small enclaves, and in one of those small enclaves, Zephram Cochrane.
There you go.
Zephram Cochrane is inventing warp speed travel, basically, and does his first test
in the
flight.
woods. He's doing it in the woods, around a campfire.
And he does his big test flight when Vulcans happen to be within reach and of observing it, essentially. So the Vulcans see him do the test flight and they show up. And that's honestly, like, I kind of think that's, like, the main positive first contact story. And the core concept of it is the Vulcans are more technologically advanced than humans, but specifically they already have a version of the Prime Directive, which is you do not contact other civilizations until they have warp travel. Right. That is the sign that they are technologically advanced enough to come into contact without the Vulcans, affecting their development too much. And this becomes a continuous thing throughout Star Trek, the question of when to contact these other civilizations. This is kind of the main sci-fi property where humans are usually the more advanced species and they're, contacting less advanced species. But in this particular instance, the very first one, chronologically speaking, the Vulcans are the more advanced species, and they're specifically a pacifist or mostly pacifist culture. They're vegetarians and they're logic based.
They're very moral species.
Yes.
So with the Borg or not. And if they got there first, Well, it does. It upends everything. So
the Borg are metaphorically hyper-colonialists. They take over other cultures and destroy them via absorption. Yeah. Anyway, so that's, this is a version of a First Contact story that is kind of closest to the Star Trek version. Except in this instance, I don't think I actually got to saying this. The heptapods have come to Earth because they will need Earth's help 3,000 years in the future. So they've come now to help them out now so that there will be a reciprocal relationship.
I forgot that. Yes.
Far off in the future. And we the movie ends obviously way before that point. So we have no idea what that is. We never find out what the result of the puzzle is. And it kind of doesn't matter. It's not really a part of this story. It's just like that's the reason that the aliens are here, to create this reciprocal relationship so that 3,000 years in the future we can return the favor.
So do you have anything else before we get to hot takes?
I don't know, it's kind of a minor point, but this movie did remind me a lot of the Star Trek movie where they go back and save the whales.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I guess in part because the ships look like whales, but also because the core premise of that movie is that these like alien creatures have shown up and are emitting some kind of sound that is causing a huge environmental catastrophe on the Earth. And they figure out, I don't remember how they figure this out, but they figure out that like they need whale song to respond to it, and all of the whales are extinct in the future. So they have to go into the past of the like late 20th century, like 1980s, I think.
Yeah, it's a specific kind of whale though. It's not all the whales, but the ones that they need are not alive any longer.
Yeah, I don't remember. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. But so they take this mating pair and they bring it into the future. So it's a similar like we need something from the past in order to save the future.
Well, and it's interesting you bring that film up, because as you were talking about, I thought there's so much humor in that film. In this film, there is no humor.
No humor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
which is also kind of
contrast.
It's also kind of a Denis Villeneuve thing. There's not a lot of, there's like no humor in Dune, or very, very little. And I don't remember there being a ton of humor in Blade Runner either. So yeah, I don't know. not a guy who's interested in humor, I guess.
No, not at all. It's a very serious setting, but almost any time you have a serious setting in any kind of story, you usually have a little bit of humor to break the tension. But he's not interested in breaking tension at all, or relieving tension, I guess. It is completely serious, deadly serious from beginning to end. But in the same, it's not depressing. It's not depressing. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful seriousness. And from the moment we see the baby, and after 2 or 3 of those age leaps, you kind of get the feeling that this is not going to end well. And then you see her at the end of that intro section that she's died. So, it's very sad. And the whole film is serious and sad. And yet it's infused with love and compassion, and the sense that we can have a better future. Life can be better if we just see each other, communicate with each other, and love each other. And that seems like a simple, overdone theme, but it is so well done in this film that you don't even realize until it's over that that's what he's saying. We get hit over the head with that kind of a message in a lot of films, but in this one it's there, and you're so caught up in the storytelling that you don't really think about it until it's over, and you have to have this smile on your face, even though her child is going to die, and she is going to experience this grief, and so is her husband. But we do get some scenes at the end where we show them happy. She's with Ian. They've fallen in love. They've gotten married. They've had a baby. They're living together in this beautiful house that must have been hers before she met him, because it was in their early scenes. And it's very beautiful, even though we know it ends tragically. For them, personally, not for the world.
So hot takes?
I don't really have any. Everything that I had is we've pretty much talked about. So, yeah. But I mean, is there actually that much fog in Montana? They don't show the spaceship for a very long time. They keep referencing it. We're 18 minutes in before we see it. And then my first thought was, oh boy, this is 2001: A Space Odyssey. And then the reason I doubted the filmmaker and back and watched the first 40 minutes this morning before we sat down to record, is that there are so many things that I thought happened in those first 20 minutes that don't. Some things do seem to be out of order. Like we never see a hint of the father in those early scenes where she's with her baby and the child is growing up and it's very sweet. We don't even see a shadow of a father. He's not, and in fact, I wrote in my notes at some point, where is the father? We don't know. Yeah. We don't know anything about this woman until 41 minutes into the film. We don't know anything about her. And that's okay. I mean, I wrote it down, but then I realized as the film went along that they were showing and not telling, which is good. They were showing her who she is, so we don't really need to know a lot about her backstory.
It was interesting. The first time I watched this movie was before COVID, and this time I watched it after COVID. So I do think I had a slightly different reaction to the opening, because much of the opening is about people freaking out because aliens have landed. And, the first time I watched that, I think I just saw it as, oh yeah, this is a scene that happens in a lot of first contact movies, the ritual scene of everyone freaking out. And this time around, I was like, oh, yep, flashbacks to COVID. I do think it feels a little bit overblown, just because, like, I'm not sure that there would be immediate looting and rioting in the streets.
That's my problem with the film. I mean, immediately. I mean, it's just, and it's not just this film. It happens in all of these kind of science fiction films where something bad has happened and everybody immediately runs into stores and starts stealing televisions. Why?
Yeah. I find the army guys trying to blow up the ship much more plausible than
that is
the random
very realistic.
Looting.
Yeah.
Yeah, because those are young men who have been raised in a fairly violent environment, the army. They've been raised to attack the enemy, and then they get radicalized by some asshole online and take it upon themselves to commit an act of violence because they think that's the only way to protect people.
And then they're freaking out because they realize that Ian and Louise have gone back into the ship, and they weren't planning on that. So
they don't even freak out that long.
But why would they assume that their little bitty bombs would destroy this big ship? That's another thing question. Too. But the difference in the two characters, Louise is wary, Ian is excited. She's struggling to breathe on the way out the first time, and he is not. She just seems very fragile to us. But at that point, we still are under the impression that she has lost a child. So it makes perfect sense to us that she is this fragile. But when we find out that she hasn't yet in the actual timeline, lost a child, why is she so fragile? So it seems a little sexist, but maybe it's just the character development that he saw as important, he being the director. And again, I mentioned this already, but when Weber asked her if she's claustrophobic or ever been scuba diving, maybe he should have asked her if she'd ever experienced zero gravity, because that would have been a better question. I just don't understand that.
I mean, maybe he just assumed the answer was no because she's not an astronaut, and how many non-astronauts have experienced zero gravity?
But she is an academic, so maybe so. I don't know. So I guess it's it. Gender stuff questions that bothered me, but I think that's it. You're right. Do you have any hot takes?
I don't know. I have two facetious hot takes. My first is that this movie is basically a better version of Contact, and my second is that I don't really know why Jeremy Renner has a career as an actor, but those are both.
I think I do. I think I do have an answer for that. I think he's very relatable. He is everyman.
Yes,
and I think he's bland. But I think for some people think bland, equate bland with being an everyman, and he's kind of that way. But yeah, I'm with you. Yeah. I've never been. He's okay. I don't hate him, but I've never really been a huge fan.
For more serious hot takes, I don't think any First Contact film has ever gotten it right. I feel like they all tend to be either too pessimistic or too optimistic. I don't think I've ever seen a First Contact film where things just turn out medium, where there's positives and negatives. It seems to, and some of this is just like, this is how films work, but it either ends in an all-out war, or it ends in this like hyper optimistic, we just get along perfectly and each species makes the other's lives better, like in this film or Star Trek where we start the Federation. That's certainly what I would hope would happen. I would certainly hope that the first aliens we ever meet are a hyper-logical race of vegetarians, because it would finally validate all of my life choices. But I feel, I mean, if I'm honest about what alien life might be out there, and I do believe there's definitely more than a possibility that there is some alien life out there, because that's a very general term. That doesn't mean that it's super advanced alien life. But I think if there is alien life out there that is advanced, it's going to be nothing like anything that we can imagine. It's not going to be something, it's not going to be the Klingons, it's not going to be the Vulcans, it's not going to be these extremely human-looking...
It's not going to be humanoid, yeah.
Yeah, to that end, I do think this film did a pretty good job envisioning a truly alien-looking alien, and that is what is most interesting about this film, is that it, like, essentially the film is about the aliens, because it's about how different they are from us, how differently they communicate, and how differently in particular they think. They literally experience life in a completely different way from how we do. Is the ending maybe somewhat unrealistically optimistic? Yeah, probably. But it is still fascinating. And to me, I think it's in some ways the best envisioning of a first contact that I can think of, because the aliens are so alien, and because it poses the question of how many different ways are there to experience life that we haven't even thought of. That's kind of the core thing that's happening in this film. And I think that's really fascinating.
Well, another first contact film that we didn't bring up is The Day the Earth Stood Still. I haven't seen it in years. I've always liked it.
There are two.
Okay, I'm thinking of the Michael Reddy version. He has been one of my favorite actors my whole life, died ridiculously young. I think that the thing about movies, science fiction movies, about whether they have optimistic or pessimistic endings, is the ones that I like the best are the ones that are kind of nebulous about that.
Mm-hmm.
It leaning towards optimistic, but true optimism is the potential for a good ending. It's not necessarily a good ending. And the potential at the end of The Day the Earth Stood Still is definitely there if humans listen.
Yeah.
The potential,
it is in the movie anyway.
In the movie, Children of Men, the potential is there. We could fuck it up all over again, but the potential is there because new life has changed everything. And that's obvious at the end of this film too. But I think because it's nebulous, it's a realistic optimism. We know that humans are flawed. We hope for the best. We hope for the future. We don't expect it 100%. But if we didn't have that hope, what would be the point? We just all kill ourselves. Yeah. So you have to have that, and I think that optimism is tempered, realistic optimism. So it's kind of nebulous. It's not nebulous. It's not nebulous at all. It's just tempered. That's what makes it good.
The thing that I sometimes don't like about the too optimistic version is that, and this is actually in the second version, the second movie version of The Day the Earth Stood Still, essentially the aliens have come down to warn us about climate change, and they end up, I think, like turning off all human technology in an effort to save the Earth from humans without killing humans off. And essentially what that boils down to is it's a fantasy about aliens coming down and fixing our problems for us.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
To an extent, the Star Trek version is that a little bit. And this one can also be boiled down to that too, but I do think this one leaves it a little bit more nebulous.
Yeah, we have to do it. We can't just let them do it for us. They're giving us the tools. They're giving us the fishing pole.
Yeah.
They're not giving us the fish. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I agree with all that. I would also say, just in my conclusionary remarks, is that I do put this on a par with Children of Men in terms of how they both effectively communicate a story and ideas within a sort of parable with scary elements and feelings of potential doom and fear of the unknown, the future. But they do it in a way that is literate, artistic, and smart. And it just feels appropriate, that they end the film with the offer of a weapon, quote unquote, that's actually just a tool, not a weapon. It's a beautiful film. I really love it. I guess that's all I have. That, dear listeners, is all for today. This has been Woman Inherits the Earth, a discussion podcast about women in movies from the perspective of a mother and daughter.
I'm Tessa Dare. You can find me at my website, tessadare.com, or you can follow me on Threads at author.tess.adair. If you would like to support us, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/womaninheritstheearth.
And I am Beth Von Baron. You can sign up for my weekly Substack, Saturday Morning Musings, at stlwriterbeth.substack.com. I'm also on Instagram and Threads at stl_writer_Beth and on Blue Sky at stlwriterbeth.bsky.social. Thank you for listening. Please join us again in about 2 weeks.